I'm looking at the game between Jon van Foreest from the Netherlands, and he was playing against Domaraju Gukesh from India. You have to remember that Van Foreest, 24 years old now, well, a few years ago in 2021, he actually won the Tata Steel Masters, so he is quite a talent, but he's having rough times so far in this tournament, and Gukesh is also having a very up and down tournament with wins and losses. So what's going to happen here? Well, no Gioco Piano, no Spanish. It's a Scotch, and Van Foreest specialises in these very old openings and often has, some new little wrinkle. And indeed, he's a real specialist in this particular opening. He has dozens of games you'll find in the database he's played with this. And it's interesting, he obviously thought, okay, this is the right moment for the Scotch as well, because if you look at Gukesh, then he has very little experience against this opening. So it's a little bit of a rarity at top level. So knight f6, bishop c5, the main moves, but queen f6. That's an interesting one. Previously, Van Foreest has played knight b5 against that, but quite quickly he went knight b3. Now, if white has a chance to play knight c3 to d5, then you have to ask yourself, what on earth is that queen doing on f6? So it just nudges to the side, attacking the pawn, which was defended. And now an unusual move, played quite quickly by Gukesh. Bishop d6. I mean, it looks funny to block that pawn, but there are some tactics down here. Knight c3 played. Now, you can't do this immediately. This is no good. This is the trick. Because after this, yes, black wins some material, but knight d5 with the idea of bishop f4. That's a real 19th century position. Tremendous compensation for white. So instead, knight e7. But that's very typical of the kind of tactics that just flow through this game. It's a really wild struggle. Now, in this case, if you play bishop e3, in fact, Carlsen had this once as black. And this time, bishop h2 is actually correct. Because after this, that's a very different situation with the knight covering d5 and the queen protects, well, and black and castle. Actually, black is all right there. So after knight e7, Van Foreest played f4. So blocking out the bishop, it looks logical and, well, potentially menacing bishop or queen. So the bishop moved. And f5. So this is a really strange position where white has gone f3, f4, and now f5. Very odd. Hitting the queen, which attacks this. Bishop d3. Some development, finally. And a pawn sacrifice. Now, judging by the speed which Van Foreest played this, it looks like this was preparation. So what has he got for this pawn? Well, pretty good comp actually, because that pawn rather shuts out black's minor pieces. But it's that bishop which is the key to the position. If it manages to get to c3 or possibly g5 to push that queen, it looks like a monster piece because there's no dark squared bishop to oppose it. d6. And king h1, okay, careful move, just stepping out away from the open diagonal. Bishop d7. And a4. So this is all very interesting stuff. Just gaining some space, you never know. Maybe, if black castles on the queen side, it might be nice just to push that pawn. Knight e5. Well, it's this square which is absolutely key to black's defence. If black can hold that knight there in the middle of the board, which would shut out this bishop, then things aren't too bad. Queen e1 played. So that looks logical to support a bishop coming here, and perhaps Queen g3, looking at playing the bishop here. And who knows, maybe bringing the queen to one of these dark squares as well. Knight c6 played, okay, supporting this one and trying to prevent this knight from moving to the game. Rook b1. Okay, Van Foreest is being very cool about this. You know, he's not sort of rushing things. He doesn't need to. He recognises that he has excellent positional compensation with this pawn, shutting out the bishop. And this bishop waiting in the wings. Rook on the semi-open file. But that's a good move, a5, which prevents this knight getting into the game with knight a5. So this one has to reroute somehow. So knight c1. But there's no panic. You know, this knight could spin its way to the king side. And that could be really, really dangerous. You know, the king hasn't committed yet. You know, should it go queen side? If he goes queen side, then obviously there's a semi-open file here. King side, well, that's also a little bit fraught with white pieces heading in that direction. So it's a tricky one. But knight b4, that's a good move. So sacking the pawn back. And if this is taken, well, okay, this is attacked, so rook a7. So black has given the pawn back, but that's a bargain. Because without that dark square bishop, then it's really hard for white to generate play, and black is just going to castle, shift, rook number 2 here. This is a weak pawn. The knight is beautiful in the middle of the board. Very clear advantage to black. So, no, one shouldn't take this. Queen g3, good move. Threatening bishop g5, winning the queen. So h6, knight e2. That knight is starting to spin into the position. The computer thinks that bishop a4 is the correct move here. I tell you what, you need guts to play a move like that when, you know, these pieces look so loose. And there's also, you know, knight f4 coming. That's a real computer move. Gukesh played a human move, which was g5. Preventing the knight coming to f4. So, therefore, Van Foreest exchanged. But at least Gukesh figures, right, I'm going to get some counterplay somehow on the g file. Now this is a very strange moment. I can only imagine that Van Foreest miscalculated something. I think if he plays queen e3 with the idea knight f4, then he has very nice compensation for the pawn. I think the key thing is where exactly is the king going? Obviously on the king side there are only 2 pawns there, looks perilous. On the queen side, well, be careful. That queen might snap down there, and you know this can be taken as well. So there are open files there. So that's the tricky thing. Black's king is not safe. So I don't know why, but he declined to play queen e3 and played instead queen f2. So he's avoided the queen exchange, but Gukesh now exchanged here, took another pawn, queen d4. Who knows? Maybe Van Foreest thought this was simply good for white, attacking these 2, but maybe he'd thought that knight e5 had to be played. I don't know. But anyway, rook g8 is a really strong move. Yeah, if knight e5, knight f4 is tremendous for white, with this knight entering the game. But rook g8 is a much stronger move. That's problematic. If the rook goes to g1, then knight c5, defends the pawn, attacks this one. That's great for black. So knight g3 was played, but the knight is on the wrong circuit. So this is blocked, but that's not well placed. Knight c5, good move. I mean, who knows? Maybe Van Foreest got to this position and thought, well, the position's opening. But watch how Gukesh plays. Knight e6. Queen b2. Bishop c6. Now that is the key piece. It's anchored by the pawn on b7, so and they protect each other, and looks at that sensitive spot on g2. Pawn takes pawn. Now, if pawn takes pawn, then rook c1, threatening to eliminate that in some cases, that's still very interesting for white. You know, even just taking straight away here and queen b6 coming, wow, really dangerous. But after pawn takes pawn, Gukesh just played castle to queen side. If he can play rook takes pawn, I mean, black is just winning this position. So pawn takes c7. Now, here's the trick. Don't take it, because that pawn is like a shield that actually covers the king. And instead, rook d4 played. The computer even thinks that rook d3 is a better move, but rook d4 is still very strong and certainly gives black a really potent initiative. Rook c1, yeah, be careful. This could be happening, but no, rook h4. There's no time for rook takes bishop, because this just leads to checkmate, basically. Sooner or later, that's mate. So rook c3 played to defend the knight. Knight c5, that knight looking at all these really dangerous jumps. Rook e3. Rook takes a4. By this stage, time was running low. There's better than that. Queen g4 with the idea queen h3 is actually very strong. But rook a4, still not a bad move, and white is under pressure. Rook f6. Be careful. Easy to go wrong for black. If queen g4, rook takes, and there's going to be a huge check down there. So queen g7, that pins. It's a really messy position with sort of these pieces flying all over the place. But I think this bishop is key to the situation. That anchors the queen side, but also it looks down to g2. And I think that's the real difference between the positions. Bishop c3, okay, tricks happening on this diagonal. So queen g5, hitting that one. It's an unpleasant position. Van Foreest was short of time. Knight e6. I tell you what, it's a real relief to make a move like that, because it shuts out white's major pieces. Again, a minor piece anchored in the middle of the board, and that makes such a difference. Just compare with this bishop here, that's a bit loose. This knight, well, it's just pinned basically. It can't really get into the position. And yeah, this could be happening as well, knight f4. Rook f5 played, that's a time pressure move, because bishop takes g2 was an absolute killer. If queen takes rook. If king takes, queen takes f5, another pin and win situation. So king g1, and now, very nice tactic, queen takes rook. That has to be taken. Bishop f3, discovered check. King here, bishop takes. Now it's not quite the end of the show, because white has this knight fork at the end of the board. But, well, basically we've transposed into an endgame which is completely lost for white. Black has two extra pawns. It's even material, but yeah, two extra pawns. And now, nice technique from Gukesh. Yes, you could remove one of these pieces and push the pawns, but it's nice to take the initiative. And actually, this starts off a very unpleasant attack. These pieces combine absolutely beautifully. White's king is in trouble here. Well, it came up the board, but bishop g6, that was actually the final move of the game. Here, Van Foreest resigned. He'd had enough. There's going to be some nasty discovered check, you know, if For example, if the knight comes here, that's not great. And if the king goes back, well, just king c6. Looking to centralise with king d5, but just making way for the b pawn to advance. And really, white has nothing left in this position. So that's why here Van Foreest resigned. So that's an important win for Gukesh. Looking at the standings, that brings him up to 3.5 out of 6. Anish Giri had a wonderful chance to extend his lead today, but he only drew against Parham Maghsoodloo. In fact, yeah, he had probably a winning position, but didn't quite finish it off. Anyway, Giri still in the lead with 4.5. He's having a really good tournament. Firuzja, 4 out of 6. He had a really important win against Wei Yi today. And then, yeah, we have the kids, Pragnananda Abdusatorov and Gukesh on 3.5, along with Max Varmadam as well, who had a good win against Donchenko. So it's really tight. 7 rounds still to play. My money's on Giri, but Firuzja is looking pretty good as well.